Welcome to this episode of the Temporal Hospitality podcast. My name is Rachel Saunders, and if you like what you hear, please subscribe. The script and the link to the sources is down below, and in today's episode I am going to put a content warning on this. This contains sensitive content which may be upsetting for some listeners. It includes transphobic content derived from gender-critical writing. This is provided for contextual reasons to demonstrate the roots of gender-critical discord and anti-trans sentiments. All quotes are attributed to their authors and do not reflect my personal trans-inclusive opinions. On the morning of June 21st, 2021, Maya Forstater emerged from her employment tribunal appeal with the decision that gender-critical beliefs were worthy of respect in a democratic society, and placed a seal on a 20-year campaign to bring gender-critical beliefs to the fore in UK law. 40 years earlier, in 1979, Janice Raymond published her seminal gender-critical screed, The Transsexual Empire, the culmination of a decade's advocacy railing against trans-inclusive second-wave feminists. The journey from Raymond to Forstater intersects with numerous notable academics and writers, including Julie Bindel, Helen Joyce, and Kathleen Stock. My focus here is the axis which runs through Julie Bindel and the gender-critical coterie which emerged out of the UK's Guardian newspaper in the early 2000s. My contention is that the history of gender-critical discourse is rooted in a reaction against third-wave feminist approaches to trans-inclusive feminism, and that Bindel's writing and activism are the catalysts for the modern gender-critical movement, which is causing substantive harm to all women, cis and trans alike. Julie Bindel, the case for the prosecution. The history of feminist discourse is littered with ascendant ideas which wane as society moves on, though gender criticism has bucked this trend. Raymond's book spurred anti-trans backlashes during the 1980s, which saw the closure of trans healthcare and the rolling back of trans-normative rights movements. However, as the queer liberatory movements emerged out of the AIDS apocalypse, trans emancipation grew with it. At law, countries across Europe and individual US states began to roll out tentative trans rights, which blossomed into a normative framing of trans identities around the turn of the millennia. From 2000 to 2015, trans people saw their lives shift from the shadows to becoming celebrated in magazines, television, and social media. Katie Steinmetz's seminal 2014 Time article, The Transgender Tipping Point, was the capstone of this, with Laverne Cox a beacon of hope radiating from the front cover. The tragic irony is that the tipping point was not one of liberation and normalisation of trans identities. It was a tipping point into the ascendancy of gender-critical discord. My contention that Bindel is a central axis is best summed up by Beatrice Campbell in her 2010 article titled Censoring Julie Bindel. Transgender people who used to live as men and now live as women persuaded the May 2009 NUS conference to mandate its officers to share no platform with Julie Bindel. Proponents say they're offended by Bindel's critique, aired in The Guardian since 2004, of trannies' perceived cultural conservatism and anatomical violence. The transgender vigilantes should listen up, wise up and grow up, participate in, not prescribe, the debate they started, and their best friends in UNUS should do what best friends do, tell them to stop. Their politics stink. This was written 15 years ago, during the height of trans-inclusive politics, showing that Bindel's work was both contested and not accepted by all feminists. Bindel herself wrote in 2007, "However, for many years I felt uncomfortable accepting a diagnosis created by reactionary psychiatrists in the 1950s, which claims that it's possible to be born trapped in the wrong body. In hindsight, the sarcasm I used in my 2004 column was misplaced and insensitive. Imagine the world inhabited by just transsexuals," I wrote, complaining about the way many transsexuals parody traditional masculine and feminine styles of dress. "It would look like the set of Grease." However, the hundreds of angry emails I received and the level of vitriol contained within them made me realise just how much of a sacred cow, at least among us liberals, this issue had become. My concern about the increasing acceptance of transsexuality as a diagnosis are based on my feminist belief that it arises from the strong stereotyping of girls and boys into strict gender roles. During the debate, I argued that sex change surgery is modern-day aversion therapy, treatment for homosexuals. The highest number of sex change operations take place in Iran, where homosexuality is punishable by death. Sex change surgery therefore renders gays and lesbians heterosexual. I did not change my mind, and I doubt if any of them did either, but this much-needed debate has been a long time coming. Her 2004 article, which sparked her anti-trans crusade, had disturbing echoes of a case 20 years later when the Edinburgh Crisis Centre was hauled over the coals for its trans-inclusive policy. In 2004, Bindel wrote, "The arrogance is staggering. Having not experienced life as a woman until middle age, Nixon assumes she would be suitable to counsel women who have chosen to access a service that offers support for women who have suffered similar experiences, not from a man in a dress. The rape relief sisters who do not believe a surgically constructed vagina and hormonally grown breasts make you a woman successfully challenged the ruling, and for now, at least, the law says that to suffer discrimination as a woman, you may be a woman." Bindel then lays the foundation for every gender-critical trope wheeled out over the next 20 years. Thus, if you are unhappy with the constraints of your gender, don't challenge them. If you're tired of being stared at for snogging your same-sex partner in the street, have a sex change. Where are those who go berserk at the ethics of genetic engineering, yet seem not to worry about major, irreversible surgery on healthy bodies? Also, those who transition seem to become stereotypical in their appearance. Fuck me shoes and bird nest hairs for the boys, beards and muscles and tattoos for the girls. Think about a world inhabited by just transsexuals. It would look like the set of Grease. It is telling that Bindel's last article in 2015 for The Guardian relating to trans issues was her complaining about being deplatformed for transphobia. Since then, she has only written articles relating to marriage, rape, and obituaries for feminist women. As C.L. Manau pointed out in 2010, Bindel was perceived to be a long, lonely personal crusader against transsexuals, and they highlight both the harmful rhetoric Bindel wrote and the contradictory nature of Bindel's feminism in denying trans womanhood. Channel 4 drew out in 2013 the contentious nature of Bindel's work in a triumvirate with Birchall and Suzanne Moore, showing that all three were at the core of anti-trans rhetoric, with Bindel accusing the trans cabal of running a witch hunt every time they got offended. A year later, in 2014, Sheffield University Student Union banned her from speaking at an event due to her 2004 article. October 2018 saw a shift in tone from right-wing publications such as Spiked, which drew on Greg Linehan's transphobic problems to compare him to Bindel and other transphobes' exclusion from the public sphere. The Spiked article took aim squarely at trans ideology, stating that the likes of Linehan and Bindel must be free to blaspheme against trans rights. A year later, the Scotsman referred to her as a leading British feminist who was almost attacked at an Edinburgh speaking event where she was giving a speech looking at the future of women's rights, without referring back to the reason why trans activists were upset at her. The move from transphobe to women's rights activist was complete. By 2022, Judith Woods outlined in The Telegraph, "I have been invited to the 30th meeting of A Woman's Place UK, an organisation set up in 2017 by a group of women from the labour and trade union movement to defend women's rights and safeguard single-sex spaces and services. A few days ago, Julie Bindel, a lesbian feminist writer, was almost mobbed by protesters at the University of York, where she had been invited to attend the Free Speech Society. Among the many outrages she had perpetrated is the entirely mainstream belief that trans women are not real women. A woman beside me murmurs, they're so young, they've had no life experience. They think we're attacking them, but we're just defending our own hard-won ground. I no longer feel like a spy. I'm a bona fide member of the resistance. All of which leads to Bindel's valedictory piece in Unheard in April 2024, titled 20 Years a Turf. It outlines Bindel's anti-trans activism in the name of women's rights, how she had been harassed and abused, and not once does she reflect on the reasons why she had faced such opprobrium. The most telling line she wrote is, "And despite being frozen out of writing for The Guardian over the past decade, I've always had plenty of work." That work has been rooted in a drift towards right-wing publications and increasingly strident anti-trans rhetoric, which has reflected the strident nature of gender-critical discourse since the trans tipping point. Bindel started off writing for The Guardian, and since her freezing out has written for The Sun, The Spectator, Unheard, and The Telegraph. 3 of those are right-wing mouthpieces, and 2 are virulently transphobic. An October 2022 Spectator article attacking Mermaids, a UK trans youth charity, rehashed gender-critical tropes that there is no such thing as a trans child and comparing gender-affirming care to lobotomies and amputations. 6 months earlier, she had joined in transphobic dogpiling on Leah Thomas as a means to attack trans women killing women's sports, while in June 2021 she came out with this. When did lesbian become a dirty word? Perhaps it is since the trans Taliban decided we were a group of bigots and fascists motivated by hatred of transgender people, existing solely to remove the rights of non-binary, sapiosexual, polyamorous, blue-fringed narcissists. This is the work Bindel is proud of. Reactionary, right-wing, and rehashing degrading and harmful tropes against LGBTQI+, trans-inclusive pride events, organisations and communities. Where once she was a thought leader, she is now simply another paid mouthpiece for the reactionary right. I would call this a great tragedy of gender-critical discourse, but that would be a lie. Bindel has been laying the groundwork for her abusive writing, and shilling for right-wing sources has enabled her to go off the chain. Her Spectator headlines include, "Why is the Globe making Joan of Arc non-binary?" which rails against a non-binary Joan of Arc because it diminishes the historic Joan's womanhood. A 2021 article, "Laurel Hubbard is the beginning of the end for women's sports," written a full year before she decries the slow death of women's sports due to Leah Thomas, and "Why Liberals Must Stand with Kathleen Stock," which exhausts readers empathise with Stock because Bindel herself feels bullied and harassed for her transphobic views. Yet, none of this is recent. Since 2013, she has written over 170 articles for The Spectator, with a distinctly middle-of-the-road to right-wing pivot becoming apparent as you read through her work. This crystallised in her writing for The Telegraph, which regurgitates right-wing anti-trans tropes and spits them out with venom. Her April 2024 screed against Gillian Keegan states, "Every sensible person knows, has always known, that trans ideology is bonkers, so there can be no sudden revelation." While in March 2025, she wrote, "As someone who has been a long-time target by gender activists for writing about this issue, the tactics used by these bullies are all too familiar. Whenever anyone speaks out of turn, that is, fails to follow the Trans Women Are Women party line to the letter, they are ostracised and harangued in an attempt to force them to capitulate." The capstone to this is her January 21st, 2025 article titled, "What's Wrong with the British Left? It has to take feminism lessons from Donald Trump." Here she sides with Donald Trump, Matt Walsh and other sexist and traditionalist commentators because they all hate gender ideology and see sex as a binary construct. The deep irony is, on April 3rd, 2025, Trump issued an executive order titled National Child Abuse Prevention Month 2025, in which he attacked gender ideology and asserted, "My administration recognises that the most powerful safeguard against child abuse is a stable family with loving parents, and there is no substitute for a strong mother and father. For all of Bindel's anti-trans writing and rhetoric, for all her lesbian activism and rallying against trans people, when Donald Trump came to attack trans people and call them evil, he threw her and every other gender-critical gay, bi and lesbian person under the bus, along with the trans folk. This is the fruit of gender-critical strife, the wrecking of LGBTQI+ rights and freedoms, all in the name of a confected gender-critical belief system, invented gender ideology as a means to keep the right at bay. Victim industrial complex. Far from being a feminist resistance to a marauding horde of trans women stealing women's rights, Bindel has moved from a lone voice on a hill to a comfy establishment writing gig that shills against her own interests. She has leveraged the vitriol and pushback against her in the 2000s into a victim industrial complex which feeds on the dregs of her bitterness. Yes, her bills are getting paid as per Unheard article, but in the process she has rejected the pluralist left and decamped to the right. 2 days before Trump's announcement on the 2nd of April 2025, the Oxford Literary Festival hosted Trans, Gender Identity and the New Battle for Women's Rights. Helen Joyce talks to Julie Bindel. The festival's media partner was The Telegraph, so it is no surprise that neither of the conversants were trans. It is also telling that neither Bindel nor Joyce have any subject matter expertise in sex or gender beyond their personal animus. Indeed, in Tickle v Giggle, Australian court case, the judge explicitly stated with respect to Joyce, Dr. Joyce is also a journalist and an author who has written on the subject of transgender identities and women's rights. She has a PhD in mathematics, but does not have any formal education or qualifications, even in biology, let alone in gender, sex, or law, being the topics which she reports to address. For the purposes of this proceedings, she is not an expert at all. She has no recognised expertise in any of the areas in which she expresses an opinion, or, more relevantly, provides a submission. This is the sum total of what the gender-critical right brings to the table. Julie Bindel could have had a sterling career advocating for women's rights. I disagree with her anti-sex work and marriage activism, but that is a matter of degrees rather than philosophic absolutes. What is cast out from the pluralistic LGBTQI+ community is the same thing that drove away Kathleen Stock and other gender critics, namely that they do not like to be told no. Stock, Bindel, Joyce, Riley Gaines and other prominent gender-critical voices have all cashed in on their gender-critical views, creating a gender-critical industrial complex which has drowned out trans-inclusive voices. Bindel has spun her grievances against trans people into a lucrative career where she is being platformed and feted for her work. Prior to her resignation from the University of Sussex, Kathleen Stock was an obscure philosophy professor. Maya Forstater is only known because she wrote transphobic Facebook posts, was called out for it, sued, lost, appealed, and only won thanks to funding from J.K. Rowling. Riley Gaines tied 5th with Leah Thomas in a 2022 swim meet. 5th, which she then leveraged into the most successful 5th place in American history in her anti-trans career. I could go on. Scratch a gender critic and a victim industrial complex emerges. Every single one of them has been challenged on their gender critical beliefs, and when told no, they doubled down for the right-wing paycheck. Yes, rape threats and threats of violence are unconscionable, and no one deserves it or any other abuse that they may suffer. But that does not excuse the venom with which they have weaponized their beliefs. Trans-inclusive voices have constantly decried the harassment and threats made against gender critics, yet, in reality, it is the isolated threats against gender critics rather than the actual violence against trans people that makes the headlines. If Bindel was serious in her women's rights campaigning, she would decry the abuse trans people face as a direct result of what she has stated, rather than siding with Trump and Matt Walsh to strip trans people of their basic human dignity. Julie Bindel deserves to be singled out as the progenitor of the modern gender-critical discord. Her animus to trans people is palpable right from the first 2004 article. She does not couch it in anything other than coarse and derogatory language. Hers is not the journey of a J.K. Rowling or Kathleen Stock. Bindel's values and worldview were baked in from the start. Like all prophets, her time has come because other people see the value in shoving her in front and centre. Yet also, like all prophets, she has been co-opted to suit the needs of others. Her victim industrial complex is wedded to the next paycheck, the next book deal, and she cannot slow down because, like all good prophets, she is a zealot to the cause. It is clear from her writing and willingness to take the right shilling that Bindel is not some lost cause that can be rescued by an intervention. Unlike younger and more virulent gender critic, Bindel is content to sit back and let her past glories speak for themselves. Her support for Trumpian ethics not diminishing her gender-critical sheen. Indeed, if the Oxford talk is anything to go by, she is being feted by the gender-critical community as someone who intrinsically represents their values. Biographic history is always at the mercy of the one doing the telling, and this is very much a trans-inclusive analysis of Bindel's career. Her words condemn her because she is recalcitrant and refuses to see the inherent and imminent danger she is causing to all women and LGBTQI+ folk. There is no excuse for backing Donald Trump's worldview on any issue or finding common ground with Matt Walsh, and that alone ought to have stopped her dead. Instead, she sits in conversation with Helen Joyce, a woman a court has explicitly stated is not an expert on gender or sex, and held court for 2 hours to the amusement of gender-critical believers. Bindel is an axis of trans repression because she has actively sought to be one, and in presenting her words, it is clear she has steered, and still seeks to steer, gender-critical discord for as long as someone will pay her to do so. This is why she is more problematic and dangerous than Stock, Joyce and Gaines. Stock resigned from her role at the University of Sussex and leveraged it into her newspaper columns and increasingly radical gender-critical positions, though without leaving her victimhood behind. She is forever known as a woman who quit. Joyce is a mathematician who saw the rise of gender-critical discourse and wrote a book with little basis in the actual realities of trans lives. Her rejection by the Australian courts is a capstone, though only serves her gender-critical credentials. Gaines has leveraged tying 5th place with Leah Thomas into a lucrative career. All of them have wielded their victimhood as badges of honour. Bindel's victimhood is equally recycled, yet it is in her coupling gender-critical beliefs with sex work exclusionary feminism, anti-marriage writing, and willingness to promote right-wing ideologues to the left, which has made her dangerous to all women's rights. Bindel is an artefact of history, having 20+ years of writing from which to view her career and values. At no point has she been moderate or willing to build bridges. Victimhood has been the root cause of her activism at every step. And while this is meaningful when tackling issues such as rape and sexual violence, when those same tactics are targeted at trans women, they become toxic. Bindel's writing has confused the genuine victims of sexual violence with the fictive fictions of a confected gender ideology, and in doing so, she has come full circle and actively advocated for voices who have categorically harmed women. Fanaticism can make one blind to the harm one is doing, and in Bindel's case, her 21st January 2025 Telegraph article was the stepping stone across the Rubicon into wielding victimhood against the very women she claims to want to protect. The end of history. Biographic history of still living writers is fraught with only seeing them in hindsight, as at any point they can pivot and produce new work which undermines every argument presented. If Bindel had left her anti-trans values in the shadow circa 2004, it is likely she would be a valued, if still controversial, member of the broader feminist movement. Her partner, Harriet Wistrich, shows this in her own writing, tamping down any public gender-critical values for the sake of progressing women's rights. Like Malcolm X, Margaret Sanger, and other controversial rights activists, Bindel's arc appears liberatory, yet is tinged with politics that has caused immense harm to those they sought to exclude. Bindel's personal history is not yet complete, though, as her 2025 writing demonstrates, she has not appeared to want to deviate from her apparent calling. In the end, the case for the prosecution depends on who reads her words. Bindel clearly has a gender-critical audience in mind, which has drifted further right the older they have got. Those gender critics support her work, buy tickets to her events, and accept her victim industrial complex because it mirrors their own narratives of victimhood at the hands of trans-inclusive society. For them, Bindel is an innocent prophet persecuted in her own land, only to find validation in the right-wing press. They choose to ignore the active harm Bindel has advocated for and is now using to undermine women's rights. They only see the trans phantasms of Bindel's own creation. This is why effective and timely historiography is necessary to hold all public figures to account. Narratives are shaped and continually tinkered with by those who have a point to make. There are no neutral biographies. Any public figure ought to be scrutinised and evaluated based on their words and deeds, not simply the narrative they seek to present. Bindel's personal narrative is one of a return from being cancelled and of gender ideological victimhood. In truth, she has taken the right shilling, and her words are showing she is prepared to wed herself to a man who harm women no matter how hard she claims she disagrees with their politics. In the end, Bindel is a tragic figure whose victimhood has made her a champion to a cause which is rolling back all women's rights, and in the process, whatever victory she may feel she has achieved is Pyrrhic. Since 2004, she has sown the seeds of gender-critical strife, and every woman, cis and trans, will suffer because of her desire to see the end of trans history.